Hello, my friends. I hope you're having an amazing day today. Welcome back to another episode of our ProRevenge series, where you come to get your daily dose of satisfaction by listening to other people get what they deserve. In this episode, there are going to be 5 stories. The first is a ProRevenge that ends in an eviction over a parking spot. The second one is a little bit longer and involves Opie getting sweet revenge on behalf of her sister. It's an incredible story. I hope you stay for the stories today and hit that subscribe button for future videos. This first story is titled, Yell at Us for Parking in a Reserved Space, Get Arrested and Evicted. Last winter, around January, my family and close friends were staying at our condo in Vermont for New Year's to celebrate. My dad owns the 8-unit complex our condo is in, and all but one unit had people there for the holidays. There's a decent amount of area for parking, but when a lot of people are there at once, it can get tight. So, one night, after returning from the mountain, we parked in the spot closest to the stairs to unload everything more easily. Our parking lot isn't one with actual designated spots or anything because it's just gravel and dirt, so it's really just an open lot on a first-come, first-served basis. A few hours later, my brother went to the car to get something and found a cardboard sign left on the car. The sign read, Reserved Parking for Unit 8, Handicapped, on both sides, and yes, they forgot the N in handicapped on both sides as well. As I said, there are no specific spots for anyone. Unit 8 was one of the smaller units on the ground level, about half the size of the rest. The couple that rented there was sketchy, to say the least. They had to be in their mid-20s, but we never saw them much, and we didn't know too much about them. Let's call them Rick and Tara. About 20 minutes later, I went down to the car to get some forgotten gloves. As I unlocked the car, the lights alerted them that someone was at the car, and through the window, Rick started yelling at me, telling me I had to move the car by morning or they'd have it towed. At this point, I could also tell that Rick was under the influence of something, so I ignored him, grabbed my things, and headed back up. I got into the condo and explained to my dad the experience I just had with Rick. At this point, he'd had enough, and decided he was going to go down there himself to handle things. My dad was really the only person who had met them before, but it was briefly during their leasing of the unit. He knocked on their door, and it was about 30 seconds until Rick angrily answered. He crankily asked, "What do you want?" My dad politely explained that no spots are reserved, and that it's first come, first serve. Rick instantly started freaking out, saying that it was a handicapped spot and that they were going to call the landlord. They had a brief interaction with my dad when they leased the place about a year before, and in that time, my dad was diagnosed with cancer and lost a lot of weight. With that, his appearance changed drastically. Rick didn't realize he was speaking to the landlord and kept his rant going. As my dad was about to lay it out for him, he noticed on the table in the living area that there was a pipe of sorts. Paired with Rick's behavior and appearance at the time, my dad concluded it was a pipe for drugs. He backpedaled out of the conversation and returned to our condo. When he got back, he called the police, explaining the situation and what he saw. 30 minutes later, the police pulled up and started talking to Rick. Based on what my dad told them about the pipe, one of the officers noticed it, but this time it was out in the open with a bag next to it. At that point, it was revealed that they were both using illegal substances and they were both arrested. Along with that, my dad also evicted them from the property for violating the terms. Obviously, we ended up renovating the whole place afterward because who knows how long they'd been using that inside. The upside is that the cardboard sign still hangs in the living room window and gives us a laugh each time we pass. Well, doesn't that stink? Yelling at someone for parking in a reserved spot and, in the end, getting arrested and evicted from the place they lived in. Too bad Opie's dad didn't pull the I am the landlord card and watch Rick's face morph into a surprised Pikachu face. Oh, that would have been amazing to see. This next story is titled, He Ruined My Sister's Only Birth Experience, so I made sure he'd never forget her. It's kind of my revenge, kind of my sister's. Both of us are really proud. When I was 14, my oldest sister Sarah was 22, and we found out that she was pregnant with Paul, her boyfriend of 4 years. They immediately got engaged, and they were really happy for a time. Sarah had a horrible pregnancy. About 16 to 18 weeks in, the wonder of creating a human life evaporated within her. She developed really bad morning sickness, was constantly in pain, developed gestational diabetes, and just all around hated the experience. Around this time, Paul, her then-fiancé, started getting sick of the complaining. I believe the argument was, "Your body is built to do this, it can't be that bad." Sarah was due around Valentine's Day, and Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, were very excited, both about the grandkid and the fact that he could be born on a holiday. She was very against that, and really hoped that her son wouldn't be born on a holiday, because it might make him feel that his day isn't very much about him. Well, Mrs. Doe said something like, "Well, if you name him Valentine or Valentino, then that'll make the day even more special for him." Again, my sister hated that idea. She thought it was tacky, that he'd be bullied for it, and just really didn't like the name Valentino. Paul loved it but agreed to go with a more common name like Daniel or Jared. Fast forward to February, and she was ready to get this over with. Sarah had officially been put on bed rest because, while standing or walking, her blood pressure took unexpected spikes and dips. I look back now, and goodness do I feel bad for her. She was doing her best to avoid giving birth on Valentine's Day because, again, she didn't want him to be born on a holiday. Unfortunately, births happen when they happen, and that baby was going to come on Valentine's Day whether she wanted him to or not. I remember waiting in the waiting room with my dad, brothers, and Paul, who couldn't stand to be in the delivery room because he thought it was gross. I was so mad that he could have gone in but wouldn't because he thought my sister was gross while giving birth, whereas I had to stay outside because I was too young to go in with my mom and other sister. Dad went home with the youngest two brothers, while the oldest, Zeke, stayed to watch me because I refused to leave. 16 hours after Sarah went into labor, my little nephew was officially a part of the family on the evening of Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, Sarah was not okay. She had to have an emergency C-section, and while doing the operation, doctors discovered that the back of her uterus had a very large and very severe non-cancerous tumor. When I say large, I mean it was twice the size of a standard uterus. The doctors were shocked and didn't understand why nobody had noticed it on the ultrasound. It accounted for her severe back pain and blood pressure issues. The doctors immediately went in for more surgery to remove the tumor, but sadly ended up having to perform a full hysterectomy. This meant that my nephew would be Sarah's only child. While Sarah was in surgery, Paul was taking care of everything baby-related to make sure his son was okay. In my 14-year-old self's memory, I remember him being suitably distraught, but I didn't really pay much mind and spent my time in the waiting room with my mother and other sister. Zeke, however, wanted to be a good future brother-in-law and make sure that Paul was okay. He found Paul filling out the baby paperwork on his own and, in my brother's words, like he had not a single worry in his mind. Zeke asked why Paul didn't wait for Sarah to fill out the paperwork, as she should have been out of surgery within the hour. Paul said that he just wanted her to rest and heal. That checked out with Zeke, as he was 16 and didn't know any better at the time. Now I know what you're probably thinking. No, he wouldn't. He knows how much she hates that name, and still, she'd need to sign the paperwork too. Well, my fellow people of Reddit, I regret to inform you that Paul forged Sarah's signature on the paperwork and waited until she was out of surgery to hand said paperwork over. My sweet nephew, who was born on Valentine's Day, was named Valentino on his first official birth certificate. I still to this day don't know why Paul and his family were so insistent about that name. He had even picked out a different one with my sister. And before you ask, no, he was never brought up on forgery charges because his parents were quote-unquote witnesses to her signing the papers, even though they only got there at the last minute. So Sarah dumped him and got her son's name changed a month later. She was willing to do split custody with him because he's her son's father, and she wanted that kid to know him, but Paul vanished. And she never heard anything back, which seemed weirdly out of character to us until a mutual friend on Facebook was tagged in his wedding pictures 6 months later. Paul had apparently started cheating on her not long after she was pregnant. Sarah was livid, but there wasn't much she could do, so she filed for child support and continued to live her best life. 6 years later, this is where the revenge starts, my friends. Sarah had been a single mother for the past 6 years and had been amazing at it. At this point in my career, I'd been a hairdresser for about 8 months at our local Great Clips. I was working one day, and who was seated before me but Jane, Paul's wife herself. I took her back for a trim, and she clearly had no idea who I was. That added up because a mutual friend who still kept in contact with Paul said that Jane didn't know a thing, no idea about Sarah, that she was the other woman, or that Paul actually had a kid he'd been paying child support for. She was in the dark about it all and had no idea. I told myself not to be a jerk and to treat her like a normal customer, which I did. At this point, Jane was heavily pregnant, so a lot of our conversation was about that. She loved being pregnant, but it was hard, and she said her husband was so unsympathetic. She mentioned that she was due in 10 weeks, and they still hadn't picked out a name for their baby girl. Ladies and gentlemen, this was my chance. I asked what kind of name she was looking for, and she said, "I want something unique and unusual but not ridiculous, like, the ones I'm talking about." Paul had suggested so many already, and she didn't like any of them. So I, the conniving little weasel that I am, said, "What about Sarah?" My sister's name isn't actually Sarah. She was named after an older family member who passed not long after she was born, but there was no female equivalent for his name, so our parents created that one. It's a beautiful name and just what Jane was looking for. She loved it. She stuck by it, and I found out by checking her Facebook months later that she had put her foot down about it, and that was their daughter's name. Now, Paul has a daughter with his ex's name to remind him every day about her, and to also remind him to pay his child support. My little nephew is 10 years old now with a new name and no contact with his biological father, though we still sometimes call him Val as a family nickname. He likes it but doesn't want to bring it to school, so it's staying a family nickname. Sarah pretends to hate when we call him that, in a joking way, as long as he likes it and doesn't have a problem with it. She's seeing a new guy who's really great and like a father to Val. The three next story focus on the experiences of dealing with racist bosses who ultimately face severe consequences. This story is titled, "Racist Boss Gets Deported." I worked at a fairly well-known restaurant in a small northern New England city as an assistant manager. The owners were very successful restaurateurs with several successful non-chain establishments and spent maybe 1 or 2 days a month at our location. The rest of the time, there was a general manager in charge, and we'll call her Jan. Jan was about as type A as they come. She was a middle-aged woman, but beautiful and petite, and she always looked well put together. Jan had worked with the owners a decade earlier in their first restaurant as a server and had worked her way up to general manager over the years. At first, I thought she had extremely high standards, which I respected. I have high standards as well and take pride in my work. I had been impressed by how the kitchens were spotless, the staff was immaculate, and the food was always top quality. I had frequently been a customer and was thrilled that I got a job there. I had been in the business for a decade, and this restaurant was the place in our area. I was so excited! Unfortunately, I quickly learned why everything was so shiny and perfect. Jan was a tyrant. She was the kind of boss who soured the mood of the entire staff, like a storm cloud hovering over us that never went away. Nothing was ever good enough, and the standards changed from day to day. On a good day, she would shut herself up in the office and then leave early. Good days were very rare and could turn into bad days at the drop of a dime. On bad days, you couldn't be perfect enough, and she would come up with new rules and regulations just to punish people. If a host or hostess called out sick, she would berate them on the phone and make them cry. If a cook made a mistake on a plate, she would humiliate them in front of the staff, accuse them of doing it on purpose, and then give us all the silent treatment for 4 hours after. If someone's cash was off, even by a few cents, she would accuse them of theft and force me to cut down their hours. As a fellow manager, I was mostly spared from her awful behavior, though I had to hear about her treatment from my staff almost every day. All of this was just run-of-the-mill bad boss stuff until it came time for our yearly evaluation meetings. This is where Raul enters the story. Raul was a hard-working dishwasher who had moved to our state from Puerto Rico a few years earlier and spoke English with some difficulty. Whenever I had to go over anything official with him, we would have a coworker translate between us to ensure we both were communicating clearly. Jan refused this courtesy to Raul, which made his evaluation pretty difficult. Raul managed to communicate to us that, due to the recent cut in his hours, he would be forced to get a second job to pay the bills. Something about this absolutely set Jan off. She told him she would fire him if he dared, that it was our place or nothing. I could see plainly on the intake paperwork in front of me that Raul had been hired with the understanding that it would be a full-time position, so I pointed that out. Jan was furious at that fact, but agreed, through gritted teeth, that if Raul agreed not to get a second job, she would bump up his hours to at least 35 hours a week. It was stated as clear as day, and I documented it in my daily manager logbook. Work went on as usual after that, and I didn't think much of the meeting again for a few months. Another time, a while later, while filling out information for tax returns, Jan called me into the office. I could tell she had pulled the tiny room apart looking for something. "All the information about our Puerto Rican employees is gone," she told me with a mixture of panic and suspicion. I looked at the files in question, and they all seemed to be in order, so I was confused. I told her I couldn't help. A few minutes later, I walked back into the office to find her arguing with Rosa, our most talented chef and a Puerto Rican native. Rosa was perfectly fluent in English, and John spoke to her as if she were mentally slow. She said, "No, Rosa, where is your green card?" Rosa responded in perfect English, "What are you talking about? Are you an illegal immigrant or something? Is that why one of you broke in here to hide the proof?" Jan wasn't yelling, but her eyes were cold and flashing with rage. Rosa was starting to get angry now. It suddenly clicked for me, so I chimed in and said, "Jan, do you realize that Puerto Rico is a United States territory, right?" "Of course I know that," Jan snapped back. "So you know that Rosa has a social security number like any other American native?" Jan did not apologize for accusing Rosa of theft. I was so done with this place after that. Jan did all kinds of little things like that, and she never apologized. I had already gotten a job offer for a place closer to my house when the final straw came. I was the closing manager one day and got in just before the dinner rush to see Raul storming out the back door. He didn't speak much English, but he didn't need to with the colorful language he was throwing around. It was very clear Jan had lied about raising his hours to 35 hours per week, so Raul had gotten the second job he talked about. When Jan found out, she fired him, but not before saying something along the lines of, "All of you illegals are the same." She was really fixated on these American citizens being illegal aliens for some reason. By this point, I pretty much hated Jan too. Since I knew I would be leaving soon anyway, I told Raul that he should go after our boss for wrongful termination, since I had documented proof. I told him I had documented the time when he had been promised more hours, and Jan had signed off on it. The last time I saw Jan was on my way out of Raul's lawyer's office after giving a deposition about several labor laws she'd violated. Apparently there were many other labor laws she'd broken in front of other employees, and she couldn't even look me in the eye. The best part? At my deposition, I learned that Jan was actually the one who was illegal in the country. Her green card had recently expired, and she was Canadian. She ended up being sent back to Canada as a result of this case, and no one's heard from her since. Raul was granted 6 months of unemployment pay, plus the restaurant had to pay his legal fees. They closed that location not long after. Maybe they should hire their managers more carefully next time. Guys, this story is so fake. There's no way in heck that a Canadian would act like this. They're the nicest people in the world. I'm joking, that was sarcasm. There are crummy people everywhere you go. I'm just glad Raul got some justice. I hope his new workplace treats him a lot better. This story is titled, "Racist Boss and Her Cronies Get Fired." I used to work in hospitality in a metro known for its obscenely huge tourist population. You know, the city built around the mouse. I was a manager for the recreational division of the hotel. One day my boss, who we'll call Mary for the purpose of this story, came into the shared manager's office and started rummaging around for something. She struck up a small conversation about work with me. It's important to note that she was actually 2 tiers above me, but was acting as head of the department while searching to replace my previous boss, who recently quit. As we're talking, she abruptly stopped and said, "By the way, you need to shave your beard. You look like a terrorist, and I simply don't employ terrorists." Haha, funny joke between colleagues, right? Nope, I'm actually half Indian and I do look Middle Eastern. I've been taking this kind of nonsense since middle school, plus, we're not close at all. So, I replied as calmly as I could muster, "Hey, I get you're trying to be funny, but on my end, it comes off as pretty ignorant and racist. I'd appreciate it if you chilled out with the terrorist stuff." To which Mary retorted, "Oh, I'm ignorant? Well, you can see how ignorant I really am during your annual review." And she proceeded to walk out of the room in a huff. My jaw dropped so low I could taste the floor. You'd think it was an easy fix, right? Like, go to HR and say she made some rude comments like this before. But I'd refrained from contacting HR because I didn't want to be petty. Now that she threatened my pay, that was a no-go. So I went to HR like a good employee and told the HR director, who we'll call Boyd. I explicitly asked him not to mention it to anyone, just to log it away in case someone else reported something similar so he could establish a pattern of behavior. Well, Boyd decided he simply must talk to Mary about it. I stressed again that I wasn't comfortable with it, since she struck me as the vindictive type. No good. He promised there would be no retaliation, and told me he'd contact me later for a statement, which I thought was weird. Why not make a statement now? And that was that. About a week went by, and I followed up with Boyd because I'd been getting some less than pleasant vibes from Mary. Nothing substantial, but odd. When I asked what happened, he told me, well, it appears that Mary was just joking, but she's agreed never to say anything like that again. Your annual review is not in jeopardy. Okay, good. At that point, I decided to just let it go. I assumed it was resolved. Fast forward a month, and a new director for our department was hired. Surprise, surprise, it's her roommate and former front desk supervisor, Joe. Okay, cool. I'm used to the nepotism because the entire hotel basically operated that way. Whatever. I'd never had an issue with him. I didn't know him too well, but I was happy our little hive had a leader again. Man, how naive I was. From the get-go, he was unpleasant, snide comments left and right. He did a ton of things that ticked me off. He would change my schedule at the last minute every week after I'd already made plans. He would also schedule me on my established days off. He would give away opportunities to my peers that I was never considered for, and he made me take improvement classes that none of my peers had to take. All strange, but up to that point, nothing earth-shattering. Until one day, I got written up out of the blue, my first ever write-up by the way, for refusing to inform a superior of leaving the premises. It referred to me leaving the day prior without literally saying the words, "Hey Joe, I'm leaving for the day." 1. This was not an established policy, written or otherwise. When I said I was leaving, it was a courtesy. 2. I knew for a fact that my peers didn't always say when they left, which was a personal observation I made and was corroborated by them after asking around. 3. Knowing that my peers weren't held to the same bogus standard and having never been written up for it, I knew this was a direct shot at me. My review was pretty much in the gutter. The best part? Joe let it slip that Mary asked for me after I left, and when it was found that I was gone, she requested the write-up. That was your big mistake number 2, lady. Mistake number 3 came when Boyd decided to cover his own backside. When I approached him with all the evidence pointing to retaliation and discrimination in the workplace, I learned that he never properly documented his discussion with me or Mary, and that he'd been basically playing around with the whole situation since they were buddy-buddy. I decided to write my long-overdue review statement then and there, turned it in, and emailed a picture copy to the corporate office. I told Boyd I was sorely disappointed about how he handled the issue. He responded by accusing me of dramatizing the whole ordeal. He was very flippant about it, rolling his eyes and everything. So, the revenge. After some time, I scrounged up all the evidence I could, my write-up, my CO workers' write-up records with their permission, company policy, manuals, my schedules for the past month, including the bogus classes I was made to attend, my CO workers' schedules, witness statements, and a few other items. The next step, I told off Joe because forget him. I made sure he was very angry when I left, and you'll see why later. After crossing my T's and dotting my I's, I resigned with a 2-week notice. That night, I typed up a letter to the EEOC and attached all my evidence. I mentioned Mary, Boyd, and Joe by first and last name. I hinted that I was pondering a lawsuit. A few weeks later, I had my girlfriend call my old job, pretending to be a potential employer asking for a reference. I gave her the extension to Joe's desk. As I predicted, he slandered the heck out of me, telling straight-up lies, which helped my case. I tried the same trick with Boyd, but he was smart enough to point my girlfriend in the direction of a third-party reference dialer that the company was supposed to use for these kinds of calls. I proceeded to send my old employer, corporate included, a cease and desist letter with a transcript of the call, hinting that I might sue for slander. The result? Some time passed, and the other day I was at the bank with my girlfriend when I got a call from my old Kio worker. I missed the call, but I resolved to call him back later. Less than an hour later, I got 5 to 6 calls and texts informing me that Mary, Joe, and Boyd were all fired the same day and walked out of the building. Mary cried, apparently. The corporate office was contacted by the EEOC and launched their own internal investigation, matching their records with my evidence. They sent me a return letter with a company statement, which was misleading, but nonetheless, I suppose they decided it was easier to nip it in the bud and fire them to be safe. Karma may be tough, but in this case, she had nothing to do with it. This story is titled, A Racist Manager's Awkward Moment. Alright guys, fluffy story time for all who care. I once had a manager make a super racist joke to one of my friends that was along those lines. My manager was known to make really dark humor and racy jokes in the office. One day, a coworker's friend who happened to be named Osama walked in because he dropped off her lunch. My boss walked over and introduced himself. As soon as he heard his name, he said the most racist and awkward joke ever in front of 5 other people. I'm not even kidding you when I say this. He said, I kid you not, "Hey, Osama, nice to meet you. Did you bring any bombs today? Because if you did, that would blow." Holy freaking heck, okay? The office literally went silent for a good solid minute, which in that scenario felt like a darn eternity. My boss then recognized that the joke wasn't funny and was like, "Well, you guys enjoy your lunch." I'm headed out, and then he left, leaving everyone baffled at what he said. We never said anything about it, but I think word got around to the owner because he stopped making those jokes after that. That was my experience with a racist coworker or boss. And here's my thought on the story. Story 1. Yell at us for parking in a reserved space, get arrested and evicted. This story is pure karma in action. Rick and Tara's audacity to claim a non-existent handicapped parking spot with a misspelled cardboard sign is laughable, but their drug-fueled rant at your dad takes it to another level. Your dad's quick thinking to spot the drug pipe and call the police was brilliant. Turning their tantrum into an arrest and eviction is the kind of justice I live for. Hanging that cardboard sign in your condo as a trophy? Iconic. I'm chuckling at the missed opportunity for the I am the landlord reveal. That would have been a priceless Pikachu face moment. This story's a perfect reminder that being a jerk can cost you everything. Story 2. He ruined my sister's only birth experience, so I made sure he'd never forget her. Oh, this one's so satisfying. Paul's betrayal, cheating on your sister during her horrific pregnancy and forging her signature to name their son Valentino against her wishes is despicable. Your sneaky move as a hairdresser, convincing his new wife to name their daughter after your sister, is a masterstroke of subtle revenge. Every time Paul says his daughter's name, he's reminded of Sarah and his unpaid child support. The fact that Jane was clueless about his past makes it even sweeter. Your sister's strength as a single mom and Val's cute nickname add a heartwarming touch. This story's a brilliant example of long-game revenge that hits where it hurts. Story 3. Racist boss gets deported. John's tyrannical behavior and racist fixation on Puerto Rican employees as illegals is infuriating, especially since they're U.S. citizens. Her outburst at Raul and Rosa, combined with her lies about his hours, shows how vile she was. Your documentation of her promise to Raul and your deposition to expose her labor law violations were key to her downfall. Finding out she was the undocumented one from Canada and getting deported? That's poetic justice at its finest. Raul getting 6 months of unemployment and legal fees covered is the cherry on top. I'm with you on the sarcasm. Canadians are lovely, but John was a storm cloud who got what she deserved. This story's a satisfying takedown of a prejudiced boss. Story 4. Racist boss and her cronies get fired. Mary's terrorist comment about your beard was beyond the pale. Casual racism dressed as a joke is no joke at all. Her buddy Joe's retaliation with bogus write-ups and schedule changes, plus Boyd's flippant cover-up, made this a toxic trio. Your meticulous evidence-gathering, write-ups, schedules, witness statements, and that cease-and-desist letter for Joe's slander were a masterclass in standing up to workplace bullying. Getting all 3 fired after the EEOC and corporate stepped in feels so good. I'm half Indian too, and I've dealt with similar microaggressions, so this hits home. This story's a powerful reminder to document everything and fight back against discrimination. Story 5. A racist manager's awkward moment. This little tale is cringeworthy gold. Your boss's bombs joke to Osama was so tone-deaf it's almost surreal. The office silence must have been deafening. I can picture everyone's stunned faces as he tried to slink away after that disaster. The fact that word got around and he stopped his racist humor shows even he knew he messed up. It's not as epic as the other stories, but it's a perfect snapshot of how awkward and embarrassing casual racism can backfire. This story is a quick, satisfying lesson in thinking before you speak. And that wraps up another episode of our ProRevenge. If you aren't subscribed, hit that subscribe button because the next 100 subscribers will get a baby duck sent to their house. I'm kidding. I'll see you guys in the next one.